All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Red Rain episode 172. Please welcome in your host, Walter Mitchell.
Thank you, Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter, sporting his Diamondbacks hat. Diamondbacks having a big week signing Corbin. That was awesome. So things are looking up in the Valley, and the Cardinals yesterday got up. Can't fault them for lack of effort. It was an entertaining game. They played very hard and very well, save for the fact that they couldn't score enough points to win a game that, quite frankly, was one of the best defensive games the Cardinals have played all year. And it's disappointing that, given that and given all the good things the Cardinals did in this game, it came down to a flukish, bizarre ending, which Kyler compared to the Packers game in 2021 kind of ending. So, but we asked our members at Revenge of the Birds to answer 7 questions, and at the end, we're going to read some of the responses that we got. But here we're going to discuss each question, and you can compare and contrast how you would answer the question to how we're answering the questions. And by all means, feel free to comment on the YouTube channel, or at revengeofthebirds.com, or on Twitter at WBJMitch. So let's start with the first question. Kyle's going to read the questions. I'll start answering, and then we'll discuss.
All right, and for the people on YouTube, you can see the questions here as well. You can read them off or follow along with us at revengeofthebirds.com. Number 1, why did the Arizona Cardinals play so much better and harder against the Rams than they did versus the Seahawks twice and the Panthers? Was it a matter of a young team and coaching staff trying to cope with the pressure of meaningful playoff implication games down the stretch?
Yes. I think yes. Clearly, they were not able to sustain the momentum they had coming out of into the bye week, and their style, they did not bring back the lineups verbatim that got them that 4-game winning streak, which was disappointing to me. And it was just a different look to this club than what we saw during the 4-game winning streak. And I think sometimes, like they say about pressure, what do they say about pressure, Little Rock?
Builds diamonds.
It can burst pipes or create diamonds, and in this case, unfortunately for the Cardinals, with an unbelievably opportunistic scenario to try to pull out the NFC West, they were so out of it that by this week they were done, and coming off a just stunningly disappointing loss to the Panthers, 36-30 in overtime. But interestingly enough, the defense recovered nicely to play in this game. The offense got its passing game going in ways we have not seen this year. But the irony is, to the tune of only 9 points, which seems bizarre. But I think the weight of the heavy weight of sometimes having to wait 2 weeks to play a game with so much on the line. I know they were saying they're just going to pick it up and try to go 1-0. It's just a lot to think about, and sometimes um, that can create a bit of a, just maybe a too much thought. They say over analysis causes paralysis. But clearly they were not the aggressive team that won four games in a row, and they were not the least penalized team in the league during their heyday stretch. They also were suddenly turnover prone, which we know in the NFL is not going to help you win games. In fact, the opposite. So my answer to that would be yes. I think they wilted under the pressure of meaningful games, but this week, without that pressure, we saw an improved effort. What do you think, Kyle?
I think that your assertion is correct. I tend to go yes with the question. The one thing I would add as kind of a caveat is the injuries, is that the team during the win streak was not the same team that was coming up against the Seahawks and coming up against the Panthers. And then obviously this last week, Garrett Williams going down with the injury, James Conner trying to fight through injury and coming back. We know Jalen Thompson missed a couple games early on in the season. You had the obvious Dennis Gardeck torn ACL in the middle of the season, which led to the trade for Baron Browning. Just going back to last night, I mean, Kelvin Beachum had to play a lot of left tackle, and really Jared Verse kind of handed it to him. He had a tough night last night. So I would say injuries also played a factor in it as well, in addition to all of the same points that you just mentioned.
Well, ironically, it was injuries with younger players playing better than the injured players during the 4-game winning streak that then when those injured players came back, they were reinserted into the lineup and the chemistry changed. I thought the way the Cardinals were able to handle injuries all year was pretty dang good considering. And so, but and last night, maybe it was a blessing of sorts, not a blessing, but fortuitous of sorts for the Cardinals passing game that James Conner went out, so that it made it less of a imminent desire to run the football. Although given the opportunities, Michael Carter did a wonderful job, and that was why I championed to have him on the roster. Um, I from the get go. I find it curious that they insert him into that role and not DJ Dallas. And if that's the case, I mean, why don't you make Carter next year the return guy? Not that I mean, I like DJ Dallas, but Carter is clearly a very skilled runner, and boy, he was running hard and tough and hitting it last night, and very impressive. I mean, here's a guy who knew if he puts this on tape, maybe someone's going to take a good run at him in free agency. And I mean, I would love to see the Cardinals re-sign him, but they'd have to make a big decision. And under no circumstances do I want the Cardinals to draft another running back in rounds 1 through 5. It's not a priority. And we'll get to other draft priorities, but they've got a loaded backfield. It just makes me wonder too whether the sort of luxury pick of Trey Benson, if you're going to go ahead and extend James Conner for another 2 years, in retrospect, when you already had a guy like Michael Carter in the building, you already had Imari DiMercato, who was coming off an excellent, freshman season, rookie campaign. So you had some real, positive guys there. At the expense. See, I love Trey Benson. Don't get me wrong, but at the expense of passing on defensive talent when we needed edge rushers. Where he was picked, we should have picked the best edge rusher available, in my opinion. because you've been kicking the can down the road. We'll get to more of that kind of stuff, but let's go on to question 2.
All right. So, question number 2, just so everyone can see it. How is it that the Cardinals far outperformed the Rams in these key stats and still managed to only score 9 points, which cost them the game? Total plays: Arizona 74, Los Angeles 54. First downs: Arizona 24, Los Angeles 12. Total yards: Arizona 396, Los Angeles 257. Passing yards: Arizona 283, Los Angeles 189. Rushing yards: Arizona 113, Los Angeles 68. I didn't realize the gap was that big. Time of possession: Arizona 36 minutes and 55 seconds. Meanwhile, the Rams 23 minutes and 5 seconds. If my math is correct, that's a difference of 13 minutes and 50 seconds in time of possession.
It's bizarre. There's no other way to describe it. I mean, these are almost doubling all their numbers. 20 more plays, twice as many first downs. I mean, close to 400 yards to 250. So, and then 100 more yards, looks like close to 100 more yards passing. Who would ever thought that at the beginning of the game? And who would have thought, almost twice the number of rushing yards the Rams had coming into this game, especially since they've been rushing it really well lately. Their rushing game has really carried them. And then the time of possession is just, fantastic for the car. This is one of their best TOP games of the season. So how did it? Why did it come down to 9 points? Well, first of all, there were key situations that Cardinals, didn't handle. They were 1-4 in the red zone, and in those possessions, twice on key third downs, Kyler threw to Dortch underneath the sticks. And I'm going, here we go. The third and give up offense has come back once again. Now, I love Dortch, and I love going to Dortch, but on third downs, this has been a pattern with Kyler for the last 3 years, is he routinely checks down and throws under rather than over. And I think it's a function of his paranoia about throwing longer passes. I have to be honest and say that, because what else could it be? And it's not working. Of course, the costly one was then going for it on 4th and 1 and getting stuffed down. I'm like, what was it, like the 12-yard line, knocking on the door. That was tough. And then, I mean, squandered opportunities. But this has been a problem all year, scoring touchdowns. I think Kyler Murray is averaging 1 touchdown pass per game, which is what he got. And finally to Trey McBride. Yay! Finally. Of course, there was no more than that, and that's what hurts. It hurts a lot. In a game that was dominated by the Cardinals between the red zones, and they couldn't get it done. I mean, 1 out of 4 in the red zone. Just if you kick 3 field goals on the other one is 9 points, you win the game. So very frustrating. Like the Chargers game, they won on, a lot of field goals. And handled the Chargers pretty well, which in retrospect turns out to be a pretty damn good win for the Cardinals when you look at where the Chargers are today. So your thought there, Kyle?
Yeah, so I think all of that usually conflates to wins. I know people talk about time of possession a lot because time of possession is the stat that very often most correlates to victory. I think in the last 10 years, only one team has won the Super Bowl while losing the time of possession battle. And I think it was the Rams a few years ago. And that's not normal for the Rams necessarily. The Rams are normally a very good time of possession team. It's interesting that turnovers are often the great equalizer. And I know Kyler Murray chucked one down the field on 4th and 10. I don't really think of that so much as a turnover per se. It was more kind of one of those punt turnovers where he just chucks it down the field on 4th down and then Marvin doesn't get it. Obviously, they could have completed it, but you're throwing a deep ball into double coverage, and you'd actually prefer the Rams intercept it than bat it down at that point. But that turnover was obviously tough on the Rams side of the field. The throw off the helmet at the end squandered points down the stretch. Turnovers are the great equalizer for doing all these great things well. But to your point, that the time of possession, especially running 12 and 13 play drives against that Rams defense in the second half. I know they didn't lead to, the first one led to a touchdown, but they didn't lead to significant amounts of points. But running those long possessions is exactly the strategy you want to do, because more often than not, that leads to victories. And the sacks really stunk, especially in key situations last night. That was something that took away from a lot of they would have had even more yards of offense if you don't throw in that the Rams were +4 in sacks. That really was part of the explanation last night, the sacks and turnovers. Like I said earlier, I haven't seen the PFF grades, but it feels like Beach had a real tough night playing left tackle. They had some issues inside, and obviously the interception at the end of the game is the one that people are going to point to and remember, the off the helmet deflected interception. But sacks and turnovers are often the great equalizer for doing great things. And if you are -2 in the turnover battle and -4 in the sack column, that often is going to be an equalizer for all the great things you're doing on offense and controlling the ball.
Yeah, and I would add penalties, which has been a bugaboo for the Cardinals down the stretch for years under Kyler. And it's not all Kyler's fault, but it just feels, there's pre-snap agita that leads to some of this stuff that really should be cleaned up by now. Cardinals got penalized 9 times for 62 yards. Rams 7 for 46.
Well, I would add even to the 9 for 62, the Isaiah Adams ineligible man downfield was a 5-yard penalty on paper, but it wiped 34 yards of offense off the board.
Correct. That was a rough one. And, in retrospect, you look at Adams and he thought Kyler was going to run, so he was going to try to make a play. So for a young player like that, I don't blame him per se on that, because you never know what Kyler looked like he was going to run, and then he pulled up through a strike downfield, which was awesome. And I thought, given the Rams' good pass rush, which, by the way, the Cardinals could have had Jared Verse and Brandon Frisk 1-2 this past year, and think of where their defense might be with them. When I get to Monty later, I'm going to talk about some things that still concern me. He's done a lot of great things, but there are concerns that I think, you have to hold him accountable for. But yeah, penalties were an issue too. They set drives back, and and at tough times, you can't have them. And unfortunately, that's penalties have been hurting the Cardinals since they came back from the bye week, which also might be, a function of them thinking too much, or, being a little more hesitant. I don't know what it is, but that's something they'll have to figure out for next year. Kudos to being one of the least penalized teams up until the bye week. So that's a good prospect for the Cardinals to build off of. And typically they've been better than this. So let's go to question 3.
All right. Question number 3. We've got that right here. What do you attribute to the Cardinals' consistent inability to finish drives? Hint, you may want to look at some other team stats that did not work in the Cardinals' favor, but we'd like to know what you think in an overall sense.
We just argued that, made the points that I think addresses that. So let's go on to 4.
All right, number 4. And just to add to number 3, just briefly, I would also say the offensive line inconsistency sometimes also attributes to the goal line struggles at times, because at that point teams have the ability to press down and that can lead to blitz packages. And so I think some of the offensive line injuries also contribute to stalling out down in the red zone as well. I'll just add that one extra point as well.
Well,
number 4.
I'll piggyback on that to say that I thought the offensive line, which was missing 3 of our stud starters on that line to start the season in, PJJ, Will Hernandez, and Jonah Williams. So the fact that they dropped near 400 points on the Rams in LA with these kind of playoff implications for the Rams, tip your cap to them. I mean, it was going to be hard to begin with because, the Rams pass rush is one of the better ones, and maybe even close to the 49ers for the best one in the division now. And you can't sleep on the Seahawks anymore. The Cardinals is by far the weakest. Something they need to address very much in this off season. So, but given those circumstances, I thought the offensive line acquitted themselves really well, and I think that Clayton Adams is one of the star coaches on our staff, and he is and Cookie, his assistant. These guys are good.
Yes, I would tend to second that as well. All right, number 4. Kyler Murray said once again to the TV crew, in this case Rich Eisen and Kurt Warner of the NFL Network, which, by the way, really enjoyed their broadcast crew. Kyler Murray said that he feels for the first time in his career that everything has slowed down for him to where it's easier for him to take command of the offense and make plays. In light of how Kyler has played or not played after the bye week, do you think the game has slowed down for him?
No. No. I mean, what does he have? 7 interceptions in 5 games, or 6 interceptions? Many of which were, just out of panic and just woefully thrown. So no. I mean, if this game slows down for you, now let's look at pre-draft, bye week. Against the Jets, yes. That was the best I've seen Kyler Murray play in the pocket as a pro. I mean, he hung in there. He waited till his receiver got open. He took a couple hits. He got whammed from the back end, got up, brushed it off, laughed, and then threw 2 dimes to score a touchdown. There, we're scoring the ball, in the red zone. So, yes, there, post-bye week, it's back to the old sort of, jittery, panic induced mistakes that Kyler has been making down the stretch in years since we've known him, and has contributed mightily to his poor records in November, December, and January. So nothing's changed there so far this year, and to say that, wow, the game's really slowed down for him. And unfortunately, if it had, I think a lot of these mistakes could have been avoided. What's your answer?
I guess my answer is inconclusive, because I would have liked for him to have elaborated on what specific things he feels like it's slowing down for him on. Because maybe it has changed for the first time in his career. I don't know if he's talking about necessarily working the ball to the middle of the field. I don't know if he's talking about running the play action fakes and rolling to his right and seeing the field more. You talked about the turnovers being a part of it, and that's definitely an equation for not having things slow down, especially some of the turnovers that he had. I'm trying to remember if it was the Seahawks game or if it was the week after. It was in Arizona, but he had a couple of bad interceptions in there. I think it was the Seahawks game, but he had a
It
couple of
was.
bad interceptions there where he was
Yep.
rolling to his right and throwing the
Yep.
ball 20 yards down the field.
Right.
Which I would understand that point, but I guess I just say inconclusive because I just would like to have more of an elaboration on what he thinks is slowing down for him and how that compares to running it with Cliff's offense or even running it the first 6 games last year in Petzing's offense, because that was certainly an adjustment period, and the Cardinals went 500 and he played relatively as well as you could expect for him coming off of the torn ACL and playing in this completely new style of offense under center. But I guess I just needed more of an elaboration from him to know, because I don't like innately believe that he's just saying it just to say it. I mean, he was asked the question obviously, but I don't think he's just saying it for the sake of saying it. I'm sure there's probably some things that have slowed down for him. I just wish he would have elaborated more on the answer in order to know what has slowed down for him at this. Like, what specifically is he talking about where all of a sudden he's in year 7 and things are quote unquote slowing down? Or is it just slowing down in terms of it was an adjustment to get into this offense, and now having played 21, 22 games in that offense, he feels like he understands what he's supposed to do, and some things feel more routine and stuff like that. So all of that to say, I'm just going to defense sit on this one and say inconclusive evidence to make a conclusion.
All right. My conclusive evidence in one play is the last play of the game. I've never seen Kyler throw a pass, a 5-yard pass, with that kind of hot sauce on it, particularly with a game on the line. I mean, if the game is slowed down, that's not a pass you throw, not with that kind of tempo from that short a distance. I mean, you could see it was back of the end zone, and you're trying to throw a dart back there. But that short with Trey McBride getting held up a little bit on the contact and trying to turn to get in position. And unfortunately, I mean, it's just so fluky that ball caromed off the ear hole practically straight up into the air, where it was like a volleyball lob, and that Witherspoon was able to, make a tremendous diving catch inches from the turf, right near the pylon. I mean, it's just unbelievable how that happened. And so, I mean, that part of it, the Cardinals got unlucky, because how about if it just hits his helmet and goes flying out of bounds? I mean, now you're living, it's second down. That's the other thing that hurt. It was first down. They had 2 timeouts left. They could have tried to run the ball. They had all these options. I mean, if that's 4th down and you just feel like, if I don't throw it now, I'm going to get sacked, that's a different story. But situationally, if the game is slowed down, that's not a play that's going to win you a ball game, or it's not a choice to make under pressure. And so I'll just answer it that way.
Yeah,
All
no,
right.
I definitely understand the point there, and I think there's fairness to the play call and the execution, because the other thing is the Rams still had 1 timeout left in 38 seconds. If you run it on first down, no matter whether you score or not, it forces the Rams to burn that last timeout. And
Correct.
and so then you have 3 pass plays where you
Correct.
don't even have to throw into the end zone. You can throw short of the sticks on a screen
You have
pass
one
or an
timeout.
out. Exactly. Yeah. I understood, and if you get tackled short of the sticks, you can run the clock down to 10 seconds, and you have 2 plays at the end
Right,
zone, and that's the better clock management play, which they
right.
could have done on second down. I think if they live to fight another day, you do the same thing on second down, and I understand it doesn't matter whether you run it on first or second down. If neither results in a touchdown, then you're still at third down and the Rams have burned a timeout. But situationally, you run it on first down, see if you can score. And if you don't, you get the benefit of the Rams having to burn the timeout, which I don't think they were preparing to not live to see second down. So, if they run it on first or second, it's the same 4 play setup. You throw
All
to
right.
the end zone, run, but didn't work out as much there.
Yep. Next question.
All right. Next question here. We have number 5. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. Let's go to number 5. Right here. Trey McBride blamed himself for the helmet ear hole shot turned volleyball lob that ended the game. Do you agree with him, or do you agree with Steve Smith's take? And I believe we're going to be able to play Steve Smith here in just a second.
And if you want to play Trey McBride too, that would be great.
Yes. All right. We'll start with Steve Smith real quick here.
But Kyler Murray, my man, in the end zone, you have your tight end, condensed formation. You have a clear out. He has an in. He can't rush it. He must take his time. Takes his time, sets up the route, goes outside, and you throw the football, 5 yards away with so much hot sauce on it.
Right into the ear hole.
It was no point of it. And then you put now your tight end, your prolific, potentially Pro Bowl tight end. Yeah. Now you make him feel like it's up to him. He let the team down. And collectively, they should have played better from start to finish.
And that's been a
It's the exact look we're looking for. I just, tried to make a play. Ball was on me quick. Just unfortunate events. It was exactly the look we were looking for, exactly what we needed, and sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way, and it seemed like that was the case today.
Is that a timing thing where the ball just got on you faster than you were expecting?
It was just it's a play we've repped a million times. It's a play I've caught a million times, and that's what's frustrating. It's my fault. I got to get open faster for Kyler. He threw a great ball, obviously, hit me right in the face, and I just got to make the play.
It's tough when a moment like
Gotta love Trey McBride. Oh my God. He is so special, not only, as a player, and I mean, he's got to be a Pro Bowler minimum, and I think right up there for All Pro this year. But he's also the Walter Payton Man of the Year nominee for the Cardinals. What he does off the field for charities, he's just A+ player, person, competitor, heart. He's crying after that, that. And I like the way Steve Smith framed this, because he was thinking of the player and what that feels like when, first of all, how dumb they feel with a ball going right off their helmet, but then feeling like they let the whole team down. And not that Kyler would have wanted to put that on his buddy McBride. And finally, earlier in the game, obviously they ran a super well-designed pick, sort of clearance wedge play for McBride to score, which he finally scored. So he got that 400-pound gorilla off his back. But it's just too bad. I mean, that Trey McBride has to feel bad after a game in which he had 12 catches for 130, close to 130 yards, and his first receiving TD of the year. It's unfair that the game has to end with him in tears, having just balled his ever living tail off. So
Yeah, the one thing I would add as well on that play or on that comment by McBride on the last play is that's the thing you're supposed to say even if it's not your fault, right?
yeah,
Like Kyler is supposed to say it's his fault for throwing it too hard, and McBride has got to say it's his fault for turning out on the route not quickly enough, right? And saying
right.
we've executed that a million times, I've caught it a million times, all of that stuff, right? Like the leadership thing in that situation is it doesn't matter whose fault it actually is because we're all going to take accountability and we're all going to take fault in the lack of execution. And that's the leadership play to say. Even if it's not your fault, you still do that. Now, I personally would say that's on Kyler Murray. That's you're throwing that ball way too hard coming out of a basic out route where he's creating separation. He needs an extra half second just to get open. It's not like, oh, he's covered and the Ram player is going to come in and make that play. The route had barely even broken off at that point. It wasn't like McBride was blocked either by the guy and he got out of the route late. That was executed the way it's supposed to. Ball came on him too hot. But it doesn't matter to them whether Kyler threw it too fast or McBride doesn't break out of the route. Both players say it's their fault, accept responsibility, and you move on from it. And I think everyone kind of could see that Trey McBride was taking it hard as soon as it happened. Obviously, the week before, he's the one who's caught on the hot mic talking about how sorry the Panthers are and how they lost that game. I think it was Elijah Higgins is over there on the bench, kind of being there and talking him through it, which was really nice to have that moment at the end. Because when I saw it on the TV, I was like, oh no, he's crying on the bench after that happened. And that made me feel really bad for him because you watch the play and it's not his fault, right? I mean, the ball comes in a bit too hot, at least as I'm seeing it. Different football eyes can see different things there, but I'm seeing it as that's a throw on Kyler and he's the one who's taking it hard and Higgins is the one over there kind of consoling him. So both people taking responsibility on that is the way that that's supposed to go. McBride definitely did his half in that clip and went above and beyond in his clip, talking about, we've ran it a million times. I've caught it a million times. That's a play that, regardless of whose fault it is, we have to execute.
Well, the indictment I would make, I haven't seen that play all year. If you're running it a million times, why are we finally, the good news is we're finally running that play in the end zone for Trey McBride, who they routinely run underneath the end zone all season and not throw to him in the end zone. So now we're doing it here. We've run it a million times in practice, but haven't seen it in a game. And it comes out with that kind of, here's the other thing is down the stretch, Kyler hasn't thrown with this kind of velocity. I think he made a special point to try to prove to people yesterday, my arm's just fine. Because the ball from Kyler has been coming out soft for weeks. If it's like if you're one of Kyler's receivers, if this suddenly is getting on you quick, you haven't been used to that at all recently. So, but anyway, let's go on to the next question.
All right. Question number 6. So Andy Kwong on Twitter had a bunch of questions here. So we're going to answer these 4 questions. Some Arizona Cardinals offseason questions a week early. New offensive coordinator.
Tell you what, you read each question and I'll read what my answer was.
Yes. All right. And again, people can see the questions on YouTube if you want, or revengeofthebirds.com. New offensive coordinator incoming, ? Will Drew Petzing get axe emoji?
No way. Mojo will double down on Drew Petzing and his style of offense because they love it. And that's what they wanted to bring in regardless of the quarterback. What they're going to need to do now is further tweak what Kyler does well in the offense and accentuate it. And because the likelihood of them bringing in another quarterback is probably slim to none. Or anyone who's going to be a serious competition to Kyler. Number 2.
Yeah, we talked about number 1 all last week as well. If
Yeah.
you want to check, not to plug that podcast, but check out that podcast as well.
Yeah, let's plug that podcast. Come on.
Yeah, check out
Yeah.
last week. Once, don't leave
Yeah,
this.
we were
podcast.
ahead of it. We were ahead of
Yes.
it.
We talked about this for 30 minutes last week. If you want to go back and listen to that podcast. Number 2, can Arizona count on defensive linemen Justin Jones and Bilal Nichols, considering how bad they looked prior to injury?
And out of football shape, being basically given the whole preseason off. That's got to change. Next question.
Isaiah Adams or re-sign Will Hernandez?
Both. Adams will be the left guard, Hernandez the right guard.
Yes,
with
that
hopefully they'll re-sign Tristan Colon to be the swing guard.
Yes, and that was always the plan. I mean, it was possible Adams was going to start the season over Evan Brown, but the plan was always Brown would hit free agency and Adams would slide in as the left guard. And then number 4, Chad Ryland or re-sign Matt Prater?
Hey, Ryland is a keeper. 26 of 30, 87% field goals, gets it done in the NFL, plus 3 game winners, and he saves $3 million on your cap because Prater, at his age and experience, gets close to $4 million a year.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. As long as you have one good kicker, you're set. As long as you got one good one, you're in the clear.
Well, and he's meshed well with his team. The teammates really, really like him, and he's fit in. He looks like core to me, and he's got a great leg, and he had some rookie, nervousness with the Patriots, but he seems to have smoothed that out. And I mean, 26 out of 30, one of which was blocked, on a long one, and so yeah, I think he's a keeper, and I'm happy that Kyle agrees.
Yes, I am in agreement. All right, number 7. Why has the Cardinals defense played so wildly inconsistent, giving up 5 consecutive touchdowns to the 3-13 Patriots and 4-11 Panthers? That's the end of the Patriots game, beginning of the Panthers game, and yet giving up only 1 touchdown and 13 points to the 10-6 Rams, who, by the way, since everyone got back from injury, I think have won 7 of their last 8, I want to say.
Yeah, they have. Way to pull that stat out. It's such an enigma. I just can't put a finger on it. How it just put it this way: when they go into the tank, they really go into the tank. I mean, there's like 5 times this year where they've given up 3 consecutive possessions that were either touchdowns or 2 touchdowns and field goals with like shoot off yards. I mean, time consuming, convert every third down kind of drives end in touchdowns. The kind of things the Cardinals were unable to do 4 out of 5 times yesterday, or 3 out of 4 times yesterday in the red zone. So, I mean, in the Buffalo game, they gave up three TDs in 4 possessions in the second half. In the Washington game, they gave up 7 touchdowns to Washington and got totally blown out of that game. In the Green Bay games, it started touchdown, field goal, touchdown. In the Minnesota game, at the end of the game, in the fourth quarter, touchdown, field goal, touchdown. I mean, when it rains, it pours, Carolina game, touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. A Carolina team hadn't done that in like decades, coming out with 3 TDs, and then so it mystifies you. Now, what I've noticed is that it's been at times when they turn to their loose, soft zones. more often than they should, leaving like they did Adam Thielen wide open, like they left Justin Jefferson wide open. Even when the Fox announcers are even predicting that they're going to be open because of the way the Cardinals are playing. I mean, the thing is, you've had success, better success blitzing and playing man than you had playing zones. And so why do you even, play as much zone as you've been doing, particularly against a Panthers team where you got to put pressure on Bryce Young, and so that you get pressure on him and then play sticky on those receivers, you might have pick balls off. But look at last night. I've been keeping a stat on deflections and pass breakups all season long, starting from last year, where we weren't getting hands on the football defensively. And that's changed some this year. I mean, last night was the epitome. What was it, like 3 balls that really could have been intercepted? The Cardinal defenders got to, 2 of which Garrett Williams got to. It was just so impressive. That now, when you're playing that sort of aggressive way and you're playing stickier coverage, these are the kind of great things that can happen. And they're just starting to learn that. I mean, unfortunately, we didn't pick any of those off, but imagine how the game might have been different had we been able to do that. And so as a result, we lost a turnover battle 2-0 when we could have had 2 or 3 ourselves. So, a little more alert. Buda Baker in the end zone. I mean, that typically would be one that he would catch, and unfortunately, he went diving for it too soon. I mean, I think he could have caught it in stride and sort of got off balance and couldn't take it in. So, but that was a missed opportunity as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think it has more to do with scheme than talent. I think they've been able to coach up the talent. I'm enthused and encouraged by Nick Rouse. I think he can get this thing right. I also still believe they need a senior advisor to come in like Vic Fangio did for the Eagles and just be an extra set of eyes and an extra, have extra wisdom to add to a very young coaching staff. And I think that would be a huge asset to the Cardinals in their game planning. Well, plus, and they do have a senior advisor on the field in Buda Baker, who has been instrumental in turning this defense around and has been suggesting the kinds of blitzes and coverages that we're now seeing that work. So he's been in Rouse's ear, and Rouse, to his credit, has been tapping into Buda, so they have a really close communication, and Buda really believes in Rouse, and vice versa. Rouse, loves Buda. So, this is very encouraging, but this season it was just so wildly inconsistent. It just kind of drives you crazy at times.
Yep, I have come on here after a number of games and kind of talked about I just don't understand the defense or understand why some of these things are happening with the Cardinals. So, I mean, ditto. It's like the personnel that worked greatest during the season when the defense was humming along the best was when it was Star Thomas, Max Melton, Garrett Williams as the main corners, and then mixing in Murphy Bunting when he came back from injury. It was Taylor Demerson playing at the safety position. Gardeck was great as an edge rusher, and I hope they bring him back after he comes back from injury, even if it's just on a 1-year deal. But
Right.
those were the lineups that were working the greatest this year. They moved Mac Wilson to some edge rush, which you had been talking about early on in the season, and that had some successes. So I just playing the younger guys ended up leading to defensive improvement. And kind of like we talked about with the offensive line, once they broke continuity a little bit, it started to not look as crisp. And we talked for an hour about the soft zones against Minnesota and everything else when we did that podcast, but it's just like I tend to agree with you. I think it's more scheme than talent for the defense. Now they do need some more talent. Certainly, I'm not saying that it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but this is the best cornerback room the Cardinals have had in damn near a decade, probably since Patrick Peterson was playing for the team. This is the best safety trio that they've probably ever had. And I know Jalen Thompson's on a contract situation right now, and maybe he'll be back, maybe he won't next year. But this is the best safety trio they've had. For all the talk about Kaiser White and some of his physical deficiencies at this point in his career, he's been solid for them this year. I think they could upgrade and bring him back. Obviously, edge is the one that's a big deal. But they've got like 6 interior pass rushers now, and including nose tackles who could give them minutes and snaps. So I think that it's more scheme than talent. That's not to say the talent is perfect, but a lot of the struggles they've had have been trying to figure out which guys to put on the field at any given time. And that's a good problem to have, because that means you can work that out in games and going into next season in training camp and preseason and all of that stuff. That's a better issue to have than we don't think this defensive coordinator can get there, or we don't think this roster can get there in order to meet the goals they're at. So these are good problems to have going into the offseason, or at least better than the defensive has had in 5-10 years.
And I'm very encouraged by the fact that Rallis's defense was able to close out second halves like they did, in San Francisco, Palo Alto, Santa Clara, up near you, Kyle, and then what they did down in Miami when they slowed down Tua. I mean, late in games, they were making some adjustments and getting stuff done by turning to a more aggressive scheme and by turning to sticky man coverage, and they have the guys in coverage. This is the deepest talent the Cardinals have had at cornerback ever. You have to go back to the days of Roger Worley and Aeneas Williams. But even then, and Pat P never had a complimentary guy really opposite him. Unfortunately, they didn't address the position well enough in the draft, and the guys they did draft were busts. So,
and the one thing that I'll add just while we're on the topic, because I don't think we've shown him enough love this season, is for all the talk about Garrett Williams being injury prone and Monty targeting people in the draft that have injury issues in the past, Garrett Williams has been everything they could have expected and more from a third-round pick. A third-round corner who has slid into a legitimate number 1 cornerback role. Everything they could have wanted and more. I don't know if he's gotten enough love this season. He's not going to make a Pro Bowl this year, but just by proxy of numbers, but everything they've wanted and more out of Garrett Williams.
Which makes you wonder why Leighton, why don't you put him on the best receiver like the Cardinals used to do with Pat P? And that's a mystifying question to me. Why wasn't he on Justin Jefferson in the fourth quarter? Why wasn't he on Adam Thielen? Take your best receiver, put Garrett Williams on him, and, make them beat you with other receivers. Or if they're going to throw at their best receivers, you're going to get the best cover guy in the building on him. So, yes. Let's go on to question 7.
That was
question 8.
Question 7. We are on to our final question. Yes, our final question 8. Jonathan Gannon reiterated after the game, "We're close. We're right there, but we're not there yet," end quote. Considering the fact that Monty Ossenfort and Jonathan Gannon not only hitched their wagon to Kyler Murray from day one without any assessment period, and that they manipulated both of the drafts to what looks like a Kyler Murray wish list at the expense of passing on superstars, I'm guessing that's reference to Will Anderson and Brock Bowers, If the
Correct.
2025 team is still, quote, not there yet, and it continues to falter in meaningful games, should the Cardinals seek stronger organizational leadership and move on from Monty Fort, Jonathan Gannon, and or Kyler Murray?
Well, here's my thing. All right. I love Paris Johnson Jr. However, you don't do you pass on the best edge rusher, productive edge rusher coming out of Alabama, in ages, who's oozing in leadership and can change a whole defense? Do you pass on a guy like that? There's only one way you do that is you have a plan in mind that's going to account for it. We're now heading into year 3 and there's been no plan in mind to account for it. No feasible plan to even come close to it. So you're sacrificing what you're saying is our offense for Kyler is more important than our defense, and our pass rush. And that, in my opinion, is a mistake. All right. This year, okay, wide receiver was not our number one priority. It just simply wasn't. I mean, and so again, with a chance to draft a top edge rusher, and there were a couple of them up there, Jared Verse. You also had Leo Latu. You had some guys up there worthy. Seeing as you still haven't, the one edge rusher that you signed came in injury prone, and he's still injury prone, and he wasn't that productive in college. And you're passing on a guy like Brian Branch, who's an all-pro in year 2. And fans like me knew he was on the board and were going crazy. It just, I don't know, something got out of kilter from the start in trying to appease Kyler. The other thing that bugged me was that we had 3 high-graded tackles on the roster when you're drafting Paris Johnson Jr. And so, again, tackle was not the top priority in the building then. But because Kyler recruited PJJ for his own purposes, suddenly we're going to twist the whole draft around to appease Kyler. I mean, this is like a double mistake to me. Like, you don't even assess Kyler because you've never seen him on the field in your kind of practice or in your building. You do see him rehabbing in your building, which he's now being paid $10 million of, incentive money to do. And off of that, it's just like automatically we're going to not only hitch our wagon to him, we're going to do, like a wish list thing, and we're going to get him surrounded by all the pieces that can help work. And, unfortunately, here's the other thing. So if that's the case, why do you hire Drew Petzing? Because you're hiring a buddy that you trust and you like, his offensive mind. So now you're going to try, if you're matching up Kyler's strengths, how do you choose Petzing and a run heavy offense? It's just like weird. So, and then in last year's draft, I mean, with again glaring weaknesses and wide receiver not being at the top of the list, you're so focused in on Marvin Harrison Jr. when there are players. So here's the other thing: is that if you're going to pass on other players at other positions that you haven't addressed yet, who are oozing with the kind of talent that can help your roster, did you have a plan in place to, did you have another plan in place to account for it? And instead, this year, I mean, they go into round 3 still having addressed the edge. They still haven't drafted a defensive tackle in the first 5 rounds in 2 years. Okay? I mean, that's mind-boggling. I mean, Darius Williams is a combo, D end, 34 D end, or 4-3 D end. So he's not an interior, he's not a defensive tackle. I mean, so you've ignored these spots, and in round 3, you take Trey Benson first, when you just turn around and sign James Conner for 2 more years, and you're still hurting at edge. And then you take Isaiah Adams, who, by the way, is starting to play pretty good football. So I like that pick. But you also, drafted a guard the year before. And you also had Will Hernandez. And you had free agent options. So, and then you tip Ryman to, double down on 12 and 13 personnel, which, again, is this the best kind of offense for Kyler? I mean, one of the things that yesterday's game proved to me is when they open this thing up, this is pretty dang good. I mean, last night they opened the thing up, and the irony is they finally opened the thing up. They got 396 yards out of it, and all these great stats, but only 9 points. I mean, but it's still a mystery to me as to whether this is the right kind of fit. Now, I'm going to write an article next week or the week after, because I think there are ways to maximize Kyler's strength in this offense that they could focus on to make it better for next year. But I'm not sure if this is going to be sustainable with Kyler. And that's why my question is, if they did all this tweaking for Kyler and all this catering to the offense, and if it falters again next year, after 3 years, everyone's equally accountable. Ossenfort, who's twisted both of his drafts to cater to Kyler's wishes, because gave him offensive guys at the top of the first round per Kyler's wishes. And then whole, 3 picks in a third round, all of them go to offense when your defense is still undermanned. It's just bizarre to me, except that you want to do everything you can to make this guy work. So what if it doesn't work again another year? Does Monty get a mulligan? Does Gannon? I say no, because when you get a player and you immediately hit your wagon to, when it's not a Buda Baker, when it's not a guy who's time proven, and you're risking your football reputation on that, you got to own it. You got to own it. It's got to work. You had to have a plan to make it work. So because you've skewed this whole thing to making it work and it's still not working, how can we trust you with what's going to try to work next? I don't think we can. I can't. So, that's where I'm at with it. I'm all about giving them next year to get it done. And I'm going to root for it big time because, losing like this really is frustrating. And it's year after year after year. And 6 years into Kyler, I got Kyler PTSD. I really do. I can't, shake some of this, the kind of, misgivings and the lies that really trouble me. And I'll get more into that at some other occasion because I'll explain to it more about where I think Kyler has created his own bad karma and it continues to haunt him. Because a lot of it is the things he says that he knows, I'm sure of it, he knows are lies. or, real stretches of the truth, but he knows his fans love to hear it because that's what they're saying. And, but I expected so much better from Kyler. I championed for him when he came into the draft. I tried to rebut some of the questions people had based on what I saw out of the 1 year at Oklahoma, which was so stunning. But, it's time for this guy to get it done. And he had a golden opportunity this year. And he was not the same player coming back from the bye. I don't know what he did or how affected it. And maybe he's PTSD himself post, come November, haunted by ghosts of past years. I don't know. But you would expect more from a guy who's so much has been given to, and so many people have risked their careers or their livelihoods on him so far. And if this doesn't work next year, and I don't think if it doesn't work next year, I don't think there's any point in trying to push it on to 8 years. So, we're going to put the chips in the middle of play next year. I think it's only fair that because of the manner in which Kyler became their guy, if he goes down, they should go down. That's my take. Kyle.
Coaches and general managers have been fired for less than the Cardinals not making the playoffs next year, right? You could go back to Brian Flores going 9-8 in year 3 and him getting fired by the Dolphins. The Cardinals are now 11-23 in the Jonathan Gannon, Monty Austin-Fort era. That is not much you can go back to your owner or your boss and say, we've met expectations, we met production, understanding that not only did they come in at the beginning of a rebuild, but their contracts were at the time, I don't know what it is now, but at the time, Austin Fort was the 31st highest paid general manager, and Jonathan Gannon was the 32nd highest paid coach out of 32 in the NFL. So there wasn't a giant financial commitment in the first place to them turning it around. And now going into year 3, especially for the coach, some general managers get the chance to pick 2 coaches, but especially for the coach and this staff, it's the results have to bear themselves out next year. However they get there. Again, context matters for how you get to the results. If they go 9-8, but they win 8 games in a row to end the season, maybe that's different than if they go 10-7, but everyone is mad at each other and you have another situation where the quarterback and the coach aren't communicating with each other, or the quarterback and the offensive coordinator aren't communicating with each other, right? Context matters how we get there, but you can't. Coaches and general managers have been fired for less in the NFL than the Cardinals coming back next year and putting up a 500 season, right? In the last 4 years, 75% of NFL teams have turned over their coach. It's not that uncommon for 3 years without any playoff appearance, regardless of your starting point. 3 years without a playoff appearance does not get you very far in the NFL. So, for the group of 3 that's been there through the whole time, being Monty Austin-Fort, Jonathan Gannon, and Kyler Murray, it's a make or break situation, especially because all of the core players are under contract now, right? Zaven got an extension.
Right.
James Conner got an extension. Buda
Right.
Baker got an extension. It's like I guarantee you Trey McBride is going to be the highest paid tight end in the NFL come the end of June or whatever. There's no reason why they won't sign him to a long-term contract extension after year 3. So, everybody is going to be under contract in tow. This is what the 2 years or almost 3 years now of losing and draft picks and rebuilding has culminated with, is not just one season of success, but sustainable success going from this point forward. And like I said, any coach that misses the playoffs 3 years in a row in the NFL, regardless of context, is subject to scrutiny and subject to their job being on the line, especially with a turnover rate of 20 to 25% of coaches every single year. 6 to 8 coaches get fired every year in the NFL, and like I said, I think 23 teams have changed coaches in the last 4 years. So any team that misses the playoffs 3 years in a row is certainly subject to that scrutiny.
Yes, well said. So, want to give some shout outs to the ROTB members. I'm going to quote a few of what their responses have been to some of the questions. With FitzFan11, he said, some games the Cardinals look like can go toe-to-toe with any team, and some games they look like the worst team in the NFL. No idea why. I would say the reason they lost is turnovers last night. Dropped 2 potential interceptions, and I feel like 2 pass breakups could have been interceptions. Kyler played well considering both starting OTs and Connor were out. He got the ball out quick on most plays, still maddening to see him trip over his own feet and scared to get hit. Remember when he got blindsided, then he got up and threw a touchdown? Maybe that needs to happen more often. The last interception was mostly on Kyler for poor placement, but he had very little time for most of the game, and I'm sure he was rushed. Need to build the offensive line even more in the off season. No weak links. Good points, FitzFan. 11, thank you. Spike Driver. Love this guy. Love all my guys. FitzFan too. Other than drafting a wide receiver with a top 5 pick, I like what Monty Osford has done as far as team building. I think he's a keeper. It takes some time to build a culture, and I don't think that the job is anywhere close to being done. I don't know if Kyler is the right quarterback for a culture of mental toughness. I also like Petzing's style of offense, but sometimes he makes us scratch our heads. He absolutely must use deception better and make good situational decisions. And I would add, Spike, that they need to move the pocket much more. They can't just keep relegating Kyler to the back end of a pocket without moving him. I was watching the way Sean McVay moves, his rookie quarterback. His rookie quarterback from Oregon. I was watching him yesterday.
Bo Nix?
Bo Nix. Move him around the pocket so well. Nix is about Kyler's size. I mean, he's a smaller quarterback. You got to be creative in where the launching points are, and you can't keep it as consistently redundant as what they do in this offense with Kyler right back in the middle. That's something I would really hope they would correct and improve on between now and next year. That's a great question. The mental toughness part of it. I've been saying sort of from the different end about physical toughness is that if you're a smash mouth football team and that's where you're designed to be, shouldn't you have a physically tough smash mouth style of quarterback to go with it? So in essence, the Cardinals are trying to be smash mouth on one end and finesse on the other. I'm not sure that's something you can really pull off, or I'm not sure it reinforces the main message of what you're trying to be as an offense. So that's a great question. FYA Troll 1 says, Murray rushed the throw because he was afraid of the pressure, but the pressure was picked up. His running back saw it and made the block. I don't know, man. The criticism that Murray is just afraid to take a hit seems to be more true than false. Also, he becomes the master of the check down. Very few big plays, a great many check downs that lead to somewhat falsely inflated numbers. Thank you, FYA Troll number 1. AZ Salty. Absolutely disgusted watching this one. Great questions, Walt. Terrible offensive line play and most play calls. OC needs to be up in the box. No pass rush, and Collins still playing the edge instead of stuffing running lanes. Kyler Murray running scared and rushing throws. And that pass to McBride was not his fault as it was thrown behind him. Not McBride's fault. Kyler's 6 years, and this is the product. We hitched our wagon to him, yes, but I describe it as a millstone. Bad investment, in my opinion, for the first time in 20 years. No plan to watch next week. Wow, Salty. Yeah, feel your frustration. Although I was more encouraged by some of the things. Yeah, speaking of Collins, watching the game, they used him so often in covering the flat in the times they played zone, and we're getting beat every time. I mean, not for his fault because they throwing in, slot shots in between the zones, which every quarterback against us gets like a 145 quarterback rating on because they're wide open and nobody covers them. So, AZ Deuce, he's been around a long time, one of my favorites. He says Kyler is literally the same exact player he was in 2019. The only change I see is that he plays under center now. His stats are remarkably the same for 6 straight seasons. The stats and game tape tell a different tale than when Kyler is trying to sell. If you think Kyler has room to grow, I got oceanfront property in Phoenix to sell you. And don't tell me his line stinks. Palmer and Warner played all their Cardinals years with worse and far more embarrassing O-lines. But they were also 10 times smarter and 10 times the leader that Kyler is, so it doesn't matter. Since 61, my brother, one of my best friends who I've never met in person, but he and I go way back and really appreciate him. Here's what he wrote. Thanks for answering the questions. My answer is I have no clue regarding the future. I will have a better idea when I see how the $100 million cap space is used, second most in the league, where and how it will be spent. It all starts and ends with Bidwell. Yeah, yep, indeed. Then Koala 83 had a number of he answered every question. I really appreciate him taking the time. Well, I'm just going to give him how he answered the last question. The NFL is a tough league. Any given Sunday still exists, and I have seen enough this season to support MOJG and KM. We're still undermanned, but the talent level is on the rise. I don't think Mo nailed this draft as well as he did his first draft, but time will tell, and maybe I'm wrong. I think we got too cute and passed on some players that would have improved the team more. Michael Carter last night had me questioning why we took a running back in round 3. Max Melton leaves me wanting a cup of Kool-Aid. But let's see if the other guys turn into solid contributors. Also, if Darius Robinson can get on the field and is awesome, we will forget about all the other picks. Good stuff there, pal. Appreciate you. And then we're going to finish it off with Laguna Pat. Another one of my venerable Cardinal brothers, been around a long, long time. Just a guy, I think, like 61, an absolute world of, and these guys give me reason to come back to ROTB every day to chime in, get our thoughts going. He wrote, well, in my opinion, KM once again made a bad throw to the end zone. If he throws 85 open on the last play and places the ball out in front, when he does get his head around, the ball will be in his hands and vision. KM is not a red zone QB, just a stat guy. interesting call on that. However, it's always interesting to watch Cam just sit down on the ground in the pocket to prevent getting hit. The sooner they move this guy, the sooner they will get into the end zone and score touchdowns. In my opinion, we have seen his highs and lows, and it just does not translate into W's. His ceiling just isn't enough to overcome his negatives. I mean, I agree. That's what I've been fearing, and just watching this, it's hard not to come to these conclusions, Pat. I mean, it's the thing is, and I'll just add one thing is, I'm going to write about Kyler, because there are a lot of things I really like about Kyler, and I think he's been through a lot. Some of the things that have plagued him were, as I said, were of his own doing and are of his own doing. But he was also victimized by Steve Keim and some others, and I think in ways that did not help his growth. But maybe if he had handled his own business better, it wouldn't have happened. But here's the thing about me and Kyler is that worries me the most about Kyler is not only his stubbornness. I mean, what's fascinating to me is that here's a guy who's grew up the son of a revered quarterback coach who was a quarterback at Texas A&M, Kevin Murray. I mean, what quarterback coach ever teaches his son how to carry the football the way Kyler does? And no one's ever made him change. And, I mean, it's like stuff like that where you just see how stubborn Kyler is. And you just know at one point it's going to cost you a big game when he doesn't see, because in the NFL, guys come at you faster. And I mean, if you got the ball like this and you just hit his arm, you can't hold on to it. It's gone. That's why you tuck it in, It's just a simple thing like that. Just shows the kind of stubbornness. And here's the other thing I'm going to write about is that with Kyler, he says he doesn't listen to outside noise. That is patently false. I mean, look at when Patrick Peterson called out to him last year. He was the first one to respond. I mean, Kyler is like a Geiger counter. He is very sensitive to everything that's said about him, written about him. And here's the other thing that really stands out to me, and maybe I'm wrong, Pat, and maybe, you can enlighten me, or 61 or anyone here who's, Spike. It strikes me very strongly that here's one of the things about Kyler that is keenly narcissistic, is that it's with him, it's either you love me unconditionally or forget about it. I don't want anything to do with it. I mean, you can't criticize him and be embraced by him. I don't think you can coach him critically. I mean, we haven't seen a coach do that here in Arizona yet. I think where Cliff got in trouble was Cliff tried to coach him, tried to point out to him and work with him on certain things. And I think that Kyler said, screw, I'm not taking this from you. And, as a result, he kind of has a lack of respect for people. But with fans, it's the same thing. Like if you notice when he signed his contract, what he said was, thanked all the fans who stayed with him and basically didn't thank any fan, any other fans who stayed with me through my process. Even though, we know what he did in the interim, which you cannot, as a reasonable football person, cannot criticize. I mean, he did things that are, taboo. And, so it gives you a choice of whether, if you're going to work with him or be a fan of his, it's got to be unconditional. And here's the thing, is that if he's not coachable, I think he expects that from coaches too. Like you might be able to, pull him aside and tell him something that he might agree with or might not. But I don't think, if you see all of his coaches, they're always, saying how hard he plays and how, they don't put it on him. No one in Arizona as a coach has, put, kind of shown some hesitation about Kyler and giving him tough love, at least not publicly. And we know that would have been worth the price of admission is for Pat and 61 and me is watching Bruce Arians coach her. I mean, it was going to be one way or the other. I mean, Bruce Arians was never going to hold back for anyone, and certainly not for Kyler Murray. And part of that really, he was like a jockey pushing his quarterbacks left and right, so, and some guys are like that. Some guys are really tough on quarterbacks, but it rubs off, like Sean Payton. He's tough on quarterbacks behind the scenes. He's really on them, but he's developing habits that end up winning ball games. So, with that said, Kyle, let's finish up. What are your parting shots on this New Year's Eve?
So 3 days away from New Year's Eve. You know what? At the very least, that was even though the Cardinals ended up on the wrong side, I was thoroughly entertained watching that game from knows everyone was trying to figure it out. But the second half was thoroughly entertaining all the way through and through. And at this point in the season, with the Cardinals eliminated and only a couple games left and so many people down with injuries, just having an entertaining football game was something that we kind of jumped past. But I know they lost, but it was a thoroughly entertaining football game with the offense pushing nearly 400 yards. And it was very entertaining to have to figure out the clinching scenarios for the Rams of like, okay, if 2.5 out of the Dolphins and 49ers and all of a sudden they clinch, and it was a thoroughly entertaining game last night. I'll give them that. And I mean, we've got a whole off season to dissect how they're going to get to what you talked about in the last question today of how they're going to get to 2025 and that make or break season for us, Fort and Gannon and Kyler, at least all three of them together. It all comes down to the next season. It'll be interesting to figure out how they get there, but I thought this was a very great way to surmise the game and surmise in a way today with those. I thought you asked very poignant questions, and the Revenge of the Birds commenters came through with some great answers as well. So I thought this was a very great idea for a show coming off a game that obviously didn't mean anything in terms of, playoff positioning or meaningful game in December, but was a thoroughly enjoyable football game nonetheless.
Appreciate you, man. And the tough stretch has been made easier for me, being able to talk with you about it because you're so even-minded and consider so many options. But I'm gonna, for now, go on the premise that the Cardinals are going to double down on Kyler and Petzing and see if they can work it out and get Marvin more integrated. Marvin had a nice night last night, and and Wilson is really a budding star in my opinion. So, and then they got absolute balling from Michael Carter, who I think, I made the case for him to be on the roster, and I would love to see them re-sign him. But it's tough because of the 3-year contract you gave TJ Dallas. and I love Amari DiMercato. Trey Benson's growing on me, but I'm still, the jury's out on him for me yet. He's got to be more consistent, but he's certainly got a lot of talent. But it's I'm going to go by that premise, and so I'm going to write articles about how I think they can make it work and how I'd like to see it work for them. So, and for us, because, but so I'm not going to just go into the tank and just say, woe is everything. I'm going to accentuate on the positives like there were last night. We lost the game, but there were lots of positives. And moving forward, maybe you turn those kind of positives into touchdowns. Then we're talking here like victory Sunday in this case. And you know how Kyle and I love victory Mondays, so those are real pick me up. So my thanks to Kyle Little Rock Ledbetter, to all the members on Revenge of the Birds for chiming in with your astute thoughts. Hope we've done you justice. We're going to do more of this, plan to do more of this. So hang tight and listen. Happy New Year to all of you. Be safe. Enjoy every minute of it, with your families and friends and everything. And, let's get excited for 2025 and hope that that's a year where the Cardinals can emerge. All right. In the meantime, may the red rain of Super Bowl confetti shower down on you into a red sea. Red rain.